Well, as I've introduced it, Mike, to the audience, Mike, we know you can't be with us today down here in Devon, but we're going to talk. We talk a lot about agriculture, and we should much more talk about fishing as well, because the two things go hand in glove. And as you know, part of the Farmers Food and Freedom Party manifesto or contract with the people is the fact that we wish to bring MAF back and not DEFRA, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Mike, you've been associated for a very long time with the fishing industry up in Lowestoft in Suffolk, a huge fishing port in the old days. Tell us about what happened. And also, we'd like to talk a little bit about, can we get it back again?
Well, good afternoon, everybody else. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a subject that has been close to my heart, even all the time since I've left the problems really accelerated then with the increase in fuel costs, which made it very expensive. Needed government assistance in order to progress or to remain viable. Now, that was not given. In fact, there was a subsidy prior to that, which was withdrawn shortly before that huge oil price increase, which hit all industries. But it was crippling, particularly for the fishing industry, because it was rather energy intensive. There were other things that predated that, which all added to it. One of them, which I've not been able to prove, I only have anecdotal evidence, was that since leaving the fishing industry, I worked in a variety of other seagoing occupations. And amongst them, we had some Portuguese ex-fishermen as seafarers with us. And they were telling me they couldn't understand why money and machinery had been provided in fishing ports in Portugal to produce nets of a type that were not used by Portuguese fishermen. And this brought employment for their wives, girlfriends, sisters, and the rest of it, mainly females working there, a few ex-seagoing engineers to control and operate the machinery, but it was rather female intensive labor. And these nets were brought over, and they were far cheaper than the traditional nets that were made in this country, many by hand because it had not been updated. Advanced technologies had not been applied to produce cheap nets, and so we lost our net making industry. We're losing the net making industry as obviously a big part of the whole control mechanism has gone from fishing. There are other things, the precious stocks licenses that were brought in, the access of foreign vessels, mainly EU, but not exclusively, to our waters. One point that always struck me as strange was one particular fish that was well sourced in the North Sea was the whiting. It was not popular in the UK, but very popular in France. So it became giving French vessels access to our waters, encouraged them to really fish hard for whiting, which they landed. They were also allowed to land some of their catches in this country. But they weren't landed in this country and put onto the market. They were landed in this country and loaded onto refrigerated lorries and taken to France, Spain. You could go to a number of ports and see reefer lorries from a lot of places within the EU, which was food which should have been put on our tables or available to be put on our tables, was taken out of the country, robbed right under our noses, and nothing done. Another thing was the relaxation of the merchant shipping law, which allowed foreign nationals to become officers and then skippers of British flagged fishing vessels. The vessels themselves were sold overseas, a large number of them. This was encouraged by the governments at the time, all part of the process of our admission ticket, which was our fishing industry being handed to the EU to allow us entry by the traitor Heath, and maintained by all those that followed him. Not one of them, not one, has done anything at all to progress our domestic fishing industry, resulting in fish prices in this country absolutely rocketing. In 1964, when I left school, I could get fish and chips at the local fish and chip shop in Hampshire, inland, not on the coast, for 1 shilling, 5 pence in my money. A couple of weeks ago, living now in a sea, or what was a fishing port, paid over £10 for fish and chips. When food prices generally have risen between 30 and 40 times, you can multiply that in a number of instances by 20 if you apply that to fish costs. Much of the fish that we do eat in this country is caught in our waters, taken to whichever country the vessel is owned by, landed there, processed, part processed, frozen, and shipped back again. Of course, food miles are expensive and becoming more and more expensive. So this is in comparison, in a few figures that I managed to dig out, was Grimsby, which was once the largest fishing port in the world, having over 400 vessels working there. It now has 20. In Hull, which was once the richest, because not the number of vessels, but mainly larger vessels, the value of fish landed in Hull was greater than the value of fish landed in Grimsby, maybe a more viable market, I don't know. There is now only one deep sea trawler operating out of Hull. And last off, the fleet was over 120 vessels, now 0. Fleetwood, which was once the third largest fishing port in the UK, I believe, if not then certainly in England, that now has only 2 fishing vessels being operated and owned by the same person. And he is highly concerned that he will not be able to continue very much longer. The large fishing dock in Fleetwood was filled with concrete some years ago and has changed over, and it's selling goods from all over the place. I don't know where they originate from. I just get so disheartened it becomes more and more difficult to investigate some of these things. And one of the other downsides of the decline of the fishing industry, which has not been accompanied, as far as I'm aware, in any of the old fishing ports by an increase in job opportunities, training opportunities, only those that take people out of the area, and they've become very depressed. Very little work for school leavers, and so youngsters coming out of school, nothing to occupy their time, no reliable source of income. They have turned to crime, and crime is rife, or petty crime. And of course, it's not just the teenage lives that are being destroyed. Their whole life is being destroyed, because once that label is put on them, it sticks with them for life. Just consider the number of prisons that have been built since we joined the EU, and that must be a contributory factor. I don't believe there's anything. Precious stocks licenses were issued, as I said before, to fishing vessels in order to allow them to fish in our waters and in other areas, what was the Northeast Atlantic area. Those precious stocks licenses generally went with the vessels, but not always. Sometimes those precious stocks licenses were held by other entities, and they became a commercial property, and some very unusual people held them and are thereby controlled. But so there are a whole variety of things that have caused that, and the effects are measurable, but very depressing.
Mike, can I just stop you for a second? Because as you know, I've been involved in fishing too for most of my life, albeit from a different perspective. But I live down here, as you know, in Kent. And in the old days, we used to have a cross-channel service between Folkestone and Boulogne. And when the new net sizes came in, so that smaller fish could not be caught, do you remember they reduced the size of the nets and what have you? I remember going over to Boulogne and seeing the big nets still on the quayside, and I said, but how is this? Because we can't use these nets anymore. They just laughed. So we were abiding by all the rules and regulations, Mike. and what was happening in France and presumably in Portugal and other countries, they were still using the same nets that they'd always used.
Yes, Liz. There are two aspects to mesh sizes. Back in the late 1960s, there were concerns within the industry about the possible declining fish stocks. And so the fishing industry itself advised the government to increase and enforce an increase in mesh sizes. I don't know where, but there was obviously opposition to that from where I can't ascertain. But the mesh sizes that were brought in were larger than the optimum. Another thing that was done was what were called blinders, which was a method of having the mesh size the same size, but decreasing the effective mesh size. They were illegal. And all foreign vessels, especially the French and the Spanish, were notorious for using blinders in their nets, which prevented fish from juvenile fish from escaping. This coincided with activity by the Fishery Patrol and Protection Service, and they were loath to board vessels for whatever reason, probably politically driven, from France, Germany, which decreased Holland, Ireland, etc., are EU partners, if you'll excuse the term. And they did police and over-policed the decreasing number of UK owned and operated fishing vessels, and issued fines. Those fines were punitive, which put many people out of business. And one other thing that Heath and his cohorts told us, our fishing industry was not a big industry and was therefore not worth saving. That was an obvious lie, because if it wasn't important to us, one small nation, how could it have been important to 9 other nations? Our fishing industry was important to 9 others, but not to us. Please explain the logic of that to me, Mr. Heath, and all those who followed you, or all those who followed you.
The other thing, Mike, too, is that when I was working in politics, as you know, I was looking at the commissioners. As you know, each country provides one commissioner from one area. And I was fascinated to see that the commissioner for fisheries was a woman from Austria. Now, as far as I'm aware, and unless my geography is way out of line, I don't see any sea anywhere near Austria, and yet she was the commissioner for fisheries.
Yes, Liz, can you imagine the condition the fish would have been in if they were caught at sea and taken to Austria to be landed? I don't think they would be very welcome on very many plates.
No, and the other thing that people don't see, Mike, is we talk about the fishermen, but it's all the ancillary companies that supported the fishing industry that have gone. So it wasn't just the fishing industry itself. It's all the other ancillary, if you like, the engineering side for the engine side, the processing side, and all the other smaller industries, if you like, that were on the back of small companies, like we had in Folkestone, that were on the back of the fishing industry.
Oh yeah, that is an important point to mention. Depending on various figures, but it's undeniable that between 8 and 10 jobs ashore were reliant upon one job at sea in the fishing industry. Another thing, there were a number in all the fishing ports, there were a number of small engineering works that did specific work. Well, when they weren't commissioned to do work on those vessels, they could tout further afield for work. And so they were a valuable source for other small companies in different industries around the company to seek one-offs, which has disappeared. And now everything comes in via container from far lands.
Yeah. Yes, Mike. Now, Mike, we've gone into some of the problems. Now, what about some of this? You know, we're always very good on the Great Resist, but this is the first time actually we've explored the problems that the fishing industry had. Now, what about, can we get it back? What do you think?
Nothing is impossible. That's been a motto I've tried to live by. Difficult, admittedly, but difficulty is not a bar to prevent. There are a number of things that could be done and should be done, led by the government, so long as they don't get over-involved, because over-involvement by government always seems to have a very negative effect. One of the things is that to have effective policing of our waters, to stop foreign vessels reclaim our territorial waters up to 200 miles, as Iceland did in 1967. You could seek agreement nation by nation, because there are different times of the year where fish are prolific in one area and not in another. So reciprocal arrangements would be to everybody's benefit. And, you know, obviously, other benefits to that. Repatriated vessels, there's something called flagging out happened, which I briefly referred to before, which was British flagged vessels being owned and operated by foreign business entities. That they're subject to British, or they were subject to inspection by British inspectors. That could be and should be reinstated. That would make that expensive for them. They would then want to reflag the vessels to their own countries. That would make it far easier for us to prevent those vessels coming and plundering our waters, taking the food from under our noses, in fact. That's the repatriation, policing of the waters, and of course, training, because our fishing industry has been run down so effectively for so long. There are very few people about now with the skills and expertise to train a generation of fishermen, which are needed. So training facilities need to be reinstated in colleges or schools, wherever around the country. And this needs, business investment needs to be incentivized. That is a problem, and the only problem that the government needs to sort by themselves. How they do that should be decided at the highest level, but incentivization should be established.
I totally agree, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, what about the number of vessels?
Well, the number of, if incentivization to increase the fishing industry is effective, then the number of vessels will increase. We also need to promote seafood as a healthy food source. The parallels between the fishing industry declining and what's happening to farming now, the same tactics are being used. First, over-regulation. Second, control. And then third, incentivization for short-term gain, which is exactly what's happening. And you can't eat solar panels. A lot of our increasing amount of our farming, food producing farming land is covered with solar panels. The earth underneath that will take time to reinstate to grow healthy food. And there's also fields being planted with other crops that are being used for biofuel.
Yeah, Mike, you're quite right. The government have been paying farmers to come out of farming. We've got the 7-point plan by BlackRock, which I keep mentioning. They're doing everything they can. They've destroyed the fishing industry. Now they want to destroy farming, certainly on the livestock side. And, you know, as we've said, it isn't going to happen. They can go and play somewhere else. They're not playing on the farming side. We will make sure that that is stopped, and we will try to get the fishing back. You're right about healthy food. Fish was always part of the diet. Friday was always fish day, Mike. I don't know whether it was in your household, but we always knew what we were going to have, something on Friday, but it was always fish. And there's so many different varieties of fish. You could have fish every day of the week, a different variety. and they're just so different in taste and texture. They're wonderful.
Yeah, I can't understand people that say they don't like fish. All I can say is they haven't tried very many varieties of fish. But yes, fish was part of the diet, even though I lived inland, and so
Yeah.
probably a lot of the fish I was eating as a youngster growing up was not of the freshest quality. Refrigeration in those days not being what it is today, but it was still a good source of food.
Yeah.
Now, these controls that have been put and that have crippled the fishing industry, now being leveled against the farming industry, will give the government control of our food. And by control of our food is one of the mechanisms which I believe they imagine they are going to control the population.
Well,
So,
you know what we've said to that, Mike.
yes, resist, resist. Do not
That's
comply.
No, absolutely. And we just say, no, thank you. And that's it. We do it all very politely, but they're not doing it. And, you know, we've got a lot of people to thank. As you know, Mark Byford, Mark the Bowler Hat Farmer, is on tour all over the UK at the moment, bringing farmers and consumers together, telling the farmers, getting the consumers to tell the farmers what they want and the farmers to go away and do it, because the supermarkets have bled the farmers dry. You know, and the stuff you get in supermarkets, well, it's just, it doesn't taste like fruit and veg anyway, does it?
Yes, but what most people know as food.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've only got to walk up and down the high street of any country and see the number of, shall we call them, overlarge people, to avoid using terms that have become currency. But it is listening to Mark as what inspired me to put this presentation together. I hope it's acceptable. And I would just like to say that, in danger of incriminating myself, during lockdown, I got totally fed up and I decided I was not going to comply. So I jumped in my car. I drove 38 miles to fishing lakes. The gates of the fishing lakes were locked. I parked outside, threw my fishing gear over the gate, climbed over the gate, and had several hours fishing, all on my own. Didn't see another soul. Had my fishing, got back in the car in a far better mood than I arrived in, and I drove home. On the way to the fishery, I passed 2 police cars. On the way home, I passed one. They took absolutely no notice of me at all.
Mike, the other thing is too, I always remember a man going to see my father once, and Dad said, why have you come to see me? And he said, the doctor sent me to see you. He said, he tells me I've got to take up fishing because I've got high blood pressure. And, you know, the benefits of fishing, like you were doing, is absolutely wonderful. I go down and sit on the beach at Hythe and just let the sea wash over the shingle. And after about 10 minutes, you don't know why, you suddenly realize you've relaxed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is, and it's no accident that fishing is the most numerous pastime in this country. Over 6 million people sport fish.
Yes,
That's a tenth of the population.
no, it isn't, Mike, because the population figures are wrong, but 6 million is still an awful lot. And I don't mean the 6 million is wrong. I mean the population figure, I should think, is probably nearer 90 mil, not 66, as I can see you're smiling, so you know that as well as I do. But Mike,
Yes,
you're right. It doesn't matter.
I
6 million.
deliberately chose that one for the effect.
Mike, thank you so much. This is the first time you'll have missed a Great Resist meeting. We will miss you. Bless you for taking the time out, but we must keep up with the fishing side as well as agriculture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. And if anybody doesn't like this video, please blame Richard Vobes, not me. It was he that encouraged everybody to do these videos.
He will be with us. I'm sure he will be smiling. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz. Right, see you soon.